Hey, I'm DJ Sixsmith. Welcome to Sit Down. Attorney Brad Edwards is here with us. Relentless Pursuit, his brand new book about the Jeffrey Epstein saga. How are you, Brad?
Good. Very nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. So I was telling you before, we ran an excerpt of your new book from Simon Schuster on all of our websites around the country. And people are obviously familiar with the story of Jeffrey Epstein and, now I would say probably 100 women that have been impacted, these young girls. When did this first come into your world and what was it like writing this book?
Yeah, so 2008 was the first time that I had ever even heard Jeffrey Epstein's name. I had a friend of mine who said, hey, look, there's a young girl named Courtney Wild who just wants to talk to an attorney who understands, crime victims' rights, and she's close to you. I'm going to send her to your office. And I said, okay. And so Courtney came in. And, that's one of those days where you remember like it was yesterday, because she comes in and she tells me about how she was abused when she was 14 years old by this very powerful billionaire in Palm Beach. And then as she starts explaining that it wasn't only her, it was her friends, and it was this kind of massive, sexual abuse ring that he had created. I said, what do you want? What do you want me to do? I'm in, I'll help. And she said, I've been cooperating with a federal investigation and I just want them to talk to me. And I said, okay, well, this is going to be pretty easy. And when I called the prosecutor, I expected she's going to say, yep, it's a massive investigation. It's going to take a long time, which would be consistent with the letters that Courtney had been receiving up to that point. And instead, the prosecutor conveyed to me that she really wanted to tell me information but couldn't, in a way that, I was a prosecutor, so that the way that she was talking was something I knew was unusual, to say the least. And that progressed pretty rapidly to the point that I knew we needed to do something. We, meaning Courtney and I, needed to do something. And I looked at the letter Courtney had received from the government saying she had rights under the Crime Victims' Rights Act. And the first thing that we did was in July of 2008, we sued the federal government for violating Courtney's rights. And that's how I came into it. After that litigation with the government went on until 2019, when the judge ruled in our favor that yes, indeed, the government did violate Courtney's rights and all of the other Florida Epstein victims. But during the course of that, I filed many lawsuits on behalf of victims. Jeffrey Epstein hated the way that I was prosecuting him, so he sued me personally. And so it kind of took over my world for over a decade. And, the book was after, this started in 2008 for me. In 2019, when we were finally able to work with the prosecutors in New York in a very undercover operation, and by we, me and many of my clients, which at this point I've represented 58 victims. We finally are able to bring him to justice, and he's arrested, and he's going to be held accountable, and then he escapes once again by committing suicide, which really, it hurt. It hurt myself. It hurt the victims, everybody who had kind of fought all this time. And I started hearing, somebody is going to write a book about this or tell the Epstein story. And I thought, it just makes no sense, because for anybody else to do it, they don't understand what really went into bringing him to justice. The only people in the trenches were me and my clients and the legal team that worked with me. So I felt the victim's voice, their courage, their story needed to be told, and the complexity of Jeffrey Epstein, which nobody else really understood, also needed to be told. And that was kind of the reason why we scrapped out a couple months of our life to write the book.
Yeah, you certainly have a unique perspective, not only with you're dealing with the victims, but also you're dealing with Epstein. And you mentioned just how massive this sex ring was. It was throughout multiple states, all over the world. When did you realize this was a major, major deal, that it wasn't just one victim, that it was girls all around the world?
So I realized that it was a major deal in Palm Beach right off the bat, because Jeffrey Epstein's scheme was get a young girl in front of him, pay her to give a massage, and then keep pushing the limit sexually. And then at the end, tell her every time you come back to my house, I'm going to pay you $200 cash or $300 cash or whatever the promise was. But there was another component, which was if you bring a friend, I'll pay you a finder's fee. So I knew by the very nature of the way that he had organized it, it was expansive. And so I started tracing from Courtney Wild to her friend, and then from that friend. And you could see this spider web of victims, if you will. And then I also learned that, hey, this is a person with homes in New York, and he has his own island, and he travels in a place in New Mexico and France, all over the world. And I thought, there's no way that this guy is a sexual molester only in Florida. I mean, that's just not how that works. So I'm sure that he's doing the same operation everywhere. And you know, as we started investigating him as an individual and learning who his friends were, and starting to infiltrate his organization, talking to former employees and talking to other victims in other locations, we realized, hey, look, this is a really expansive sex trafficking ring that needs to be brought to justice.
And it wasn't just him, too. I mean, a lot of people have learned the name Delane Maxwell in the past few months. In the context of your book, you write about how there were people at the house who had a specific manual about how to go about things. She was involved in the abuse. She was involved in bringing girls in. When does her name first come into your life?
Yes, so she was a name that came up early. Just doing, you know, any kind of basic research on Jeffrey Epstein, you learn, hey, this was his girlfriend during the whole period of the 90s. But more than that, there was a complaint filed by Jane Doe number 102. She, at the time, was represented by a different lawyer. But in her complaint, she detailed being recruited when she was underage by Delane Maxwell, and being trafficked or traveled around the world and made to engage in these sex acts from the time she was 16 or 17 years old with not only Jeffrey Epstein, but some of his friends. And the fact that now we knew the beginning of the spider web, what was the Florida spider web of victims, began with Delane Maxwell's recruitment of Jane Doe 102, who we learned was Virginia Robert.